Welcome, whether you're here or there. Remember this? We found this, a creation by North American artist Bob Harper.
Oh,
Amazing what you find when you clean up. You know? Welcome to the friendship class, wherever you are. Before we begin our lesson, I would like to make one or two personal accounts of appreciation, if I may. First of all, is to my co-teacher friend, Fred Anderson. Back in June, I planned a beach trip with my children and needed to swap Sundays, and Fred graciously offered to swap Sundays with me, and that was wonderful. But lo and behold, when July came around, my husband, who is working in other fields, came home with a case of COVID and shared his blessings with me. So in July, I was quarantined. And I had to call my friend Fred Anderson, say, Fred, you know, that favor you did for me in June, could you do it again in July? So he did graciously, and I am so indebted to him, and you as well. And this would normally be his Sunday to teach, but he taught 2 weeks ago for me. I'm grateful for his graciousness. Second point of gratitude. I've been teaching in this room off and on for about 20 years. Bill and I moved to Richmond in 2001 and joined the church. The Lydia class was meeting in this room. They had a rotation of teachers similar to the way we do, and one of their teachers had moved out of town and they needed one, and they asked me if I would come and teach. So I agreed. There were about 20 or 25 women in this room, and the lectern was up there and the chairs were placed all like this. They were women that you know: Martha Thomas, Helen Davis, George's mother, both of whom I believe were charter members of this church. Joe Kassler, Mildred Scherer, Liz Yeakley, Bess Price, Sue Schumann, Marion Brooks, all of those names that many of you remember. Now, at that time, our class was downstairs on the lower level. And then it was decided that we would come upstairs and we would be in that room over there. Well, after a while, we all looked around and we said, you know, friendship class is bigger than that room. Lydia class is small and this room is bigger. Let's just swap. All right. Well, the Lydia ladies sort of looked around and took a deep breath and said, okay, we can do this. And they swapped. And a few weeks after that, one of the women said to me, well, you know, we kind of didn't want it, but we kind of didn't have a choice, because you know what? We did not want the rest of the church to think that we were so old and set in our ways that we couldn't change. All right, now, 20 years later, they are all gone, every one of them, except maybe one or two in the nursing home. They have all passed away. The class is no more. Chester kind of helped me preside over the end times of them, but it was a celebration. It wasn't sad, it was a celebration. It really was. But to me, they were the matriarchs of this church. They really were. And Chester said when he first started in youth work, they were the go-to people that he went to when he needed anything, that it got done. They meant so much to him. They were well organized and did everything well, loved this church. And I'll bet you that Joe Kassler knew Parliament for procedure better than any person in this church. She'd been president of the Virginia Federation of Garden Clubs. That's not a job that many of us could handle very well, but she did it with grace. So I just think that that's worth noting today. This is the anniversary year of our class and the anniversary year of the church, and it's just wise that we remember these people. So this room was someone else's before it was ours. It really was. And it was their graciousness that allowed it to happen for us. All right, on to today's lesson. Now, in the month of July, we are in a 5 Sunday unit on Jacob's sons. Some of these stories we are very familiar with. Some we are not so familiar with. Some stories reveal to us a very highly dysfunctional family, soap opera style, as we listened last week. There was rivalry, jealousy, lust, anger, deception, and a lot of things that were perpetrated by powerful men who executed their power. Now, we think so often of stories in the Bible that need to teach us how to live. But in some of these cases, we observe it is telling us how not to live. But these stories are all in the Bible for a reason. Today's story is about Joseph. He was probably the most well-known of Jacob's sons, and certainly one of the most well-known stories in the Old Testament. The title of today's lesson is The Brothers' Jealousy. And the central question right underneath that title that our lesson writer wants us to examine is, when has jealousy gotten the better of me? Now, I think most of us at our age have lived long enough that we have seen a lot of today's story. We have seen it played out in our own families, in our extended families, and with friends. We will recognize a lot of these dynamics as they unfold in today's story. And how many years ago did these people live? Thousands. And these stories are still with us. We will see in today's story favoritism, the pet child. We will see envy, jealousy, sibling rivalry, anger, dishonesty, and bickering. It's all there. And it's all right here in chapter 37 in Genesis. Now, this man, Jacob, the father, was no stranger to deceit. Remember his story? I think you talked about that on the first Sunday. He and his mother tricked his father, Isaac, into getting him the birthright that was really due to his brother Esau. Then, of course, he goes off to another place and another family and works for his uncle, and he falls in love with Rachel. And he is promised Rachel's hand in marriage. But then, as things would have it, he wound up, after he'd worked 7 years, for Leah. So after Leah, then he has to work another years for Rachel. Oh, by the way, in your lesson book on page 78, there is an excellent chart, which is a family tree of Jacob and his sons, except they left one little arrow off, I think. And I thought, well, glory, hallelujah. Somebody that's writing a lesson has put in it, a family tree or a map or a chart or something that can help us figure these people out a little bit better. Because I know sometimes when I've been teaching, well, I haven't taught that for a while. It's kind of foggy in my head, and I'll kind of write it onto a paper, who's the father, who's the son, and who's this, to get it figured out. So thank goodness they wrote it there for you. Take note of it. Now, as you know, Jacob was married to Leah and Rachel, and then he had 2 concubines, so these are 4 women, and they've got all these children, and how they are interrelated. That's the family story. But yeah, before we delve into chapter 37, I want us to set the stage a little bit for the scene so that we'll understand it even better. Now, verse 3 really tells us a whole lot. It says Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because he was the son of his old age. All right. Well, there are several reasons he loved Joseph more, I think. He was the first child of Rachel. Then, of course, Rachel has Benjamin, and she dies after Benjamin is born. But that was one reason. The other reason, he was also the child of his old age. Have you ever heard that before? I have. A family of a lot of children, and maybe there's the last child that was not planned or intended, and this child appears, and the parents say, And then all of a sudden, the last child really does have a great deal of joy and comfort in the family. It's in my own family. It's my father's story. Not that I heard it. He was born in 1894. But I've heard some of his sisters and nieces say that the grandmother said, I've had 12 children and I don't see the need for the 13th. But lo and behold, he came along and he was the child that she said was such a joy and a comfort to her in her last years as the others went on off. He was 16 when she died, and he was the 13th. And oddly enough, he was not so much the favorite. Well, they all doted on him. He became in later years the patriarch of that family. Didn't see too much sibling rivalry there, in my opinion. Then, of course, he was middle-aged when I was born, and I'm an only child. So I know nothing about sibling rivalry. It's just not, I can't tell you much about that. Didn't have anybody to fuss and fight with, whatever. But anyway, that's my family. Now, my mother's family, those 4 sisters, oh yeah, sibling rivalry, a lot of it going on there. So it's all different. But you just look at your own family as we read this story. You see some of it, you'll recognize some of it. It's not new. All right. Part of the rest of the story is he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. Now, you and I will remember studying this as children, and it was talking about Joseph and his coat of many colors. Also, you remember that musical, Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. All right. We say coat of many colors, and that was probably true because there were probably expensive dyes in this coat. But the truth be known is it was a coat, an outer coat that had long sleeves and ornamentation on it of such that it would have been worn by a person of prominence or maybe even royalty. And there were the rest of his brothers, in shepherd's clothing, and there was Joseph, with this fancy coat. So you see how that played out. Now, let me divert even more at this point and talk a little bit about the coat. I think one of the problems that you and I and everybody has in studying the Bible is that it is hard for us to get our heads around how these people actually lived and what a little bit of this and that they had. And I have heard my husband say in sermons sometimes, these people lived on the edge of starvation a good bit of the time. I mean, food was just what you could gather and fix right now. You didn't have any way of storing or preserving or banking up like we do and letting things go to waste like we do today. Now, clothing was similar. The clothing worn by people in these days, there was usually what we called a tunic. In other words, it was just a long dress or robe. It might have come to the knee or to the ankle, with maybe some sleeves in it, kind of like an ordinary blouse or shirt. And worn like that, that was the tunic. And men, of course, might have worn a loincloth. You remember the phrase, skirt up your loins for work. All right. The outer garment was just like a mantle or a piece of cloth that they maybe draped around their body in a certain way. And for many of them, it was their blanket at night when they lay down to sleep. Or many times women knew how to fold it around them and carry things that they might need, food or whatever. So this outer garment was used for many things. Do you remember at the cross when Jesus was being crucified? We read that the Roman soldiers, or who they were, the legions, cast lots for his clothes. Remember that? And in the way we would think, why would soldiers care 2 cents about the clothes for a man that's been executed? That doesn't make sense to me, but that goes to show the cloth was sort of valuable. Now, so the spinning of thread and the making of cloth was probably a lot different from what it is today. Now, I divert even more. When we were living in Louisville and church there, St. Matthew's Baptist, when it came time for vacation Bible school, we had Bible school. And the minister of children converted the entire fellowship hall, bigger than ours, a lower room with a carpet and windows, into the city of Jerusalem. And we had stations over here of food and preparation. the cobbler's place, shoemaking, the carpenters, just all kinds of things that you would think, and weaving of cloth. Then the temple was built in the middle, and they made the temple out of cardboard and put it up on a frame of 2x4s and painted it. I mean, can you imagine how long it took these people to do this? And then there was the temple in the center, and Bill was a rabbi. And so he stood in the temple and he told the Bible stories, or sometimes he had a little film thing and he had showed pictures of city life in Jerusalem. And like I say, if I had fourth graders in my classroom, I would keep them there for a while and do our activities. In certain times of each day, we would go into the city and do something or have a little demonstration or something, and then listen to him tell the story or whatever. Would you believe in that church, we had 2 women who owned a loom, loom, as it weave cloth on. And this dear one woman allowed her expensive loom, I'm sure, to be brought to the church for the children to work on. Men came in a pickup truck and carted that great big thing and set it up, and she came and she got the threads all set up on it, and she sat there and she let each child, now the loom to me looks like an organ console. There's a bench and you sit on it and there are threads at the bottom. Then there are all these threads that go here and here and here and all these things. And then you move the threads like this. And then you take the shuttle and you go back and forth.
It's like a giant pot holder.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we learned to make those pot holders, and I taught my children and grandchildren, and they had loads of fun doing it, didn't they? Yeah, it's the same thing, exactly. All right. So she let each child sit down at the bench, and she taught them and showed them the threads and how they were positioned. So then they would shoot the shuttle through, and then she would pull it back and tighten the threads and let the other one go back. What an experience. Now, this is the finished product.
How about that?
So that each child, because you can see she didn't make it a wide piece of cloth, but she let them go back and forward. And she wound the loom up. And then now Bill had safety pins on this. And then for a while, he wore it, like a stole, like the minister wears. Yeah, and they gave it to him at the end of the week. And then he kept it for the next year, and the next group of children came and did something else. But isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
It's such a treasure. And what a gift for that woman to bring such an expensive item and to stand there all week long. She wasn't real young. Stand there all week long and show those children how to do it. I have some towels that she did for me, and they're treasures, I tell you, handmade. But I just thought, what a treasure for those children to understand the process of weaving. Because in the day of Jesus, that first of all, you've got to spin. You've got to spin your thread. And that had to be done with sometimes animal hairs. Linen and flax came from Egypt. They didn't have that. They had to do all these fibers to get the thread. And then you have to set this up on a loom, with the whoop and the wave to go this way and that way and do like that. Can you imagine how long it took those people to weave a piece of cloth? No wonder they didn't have but 1 or 2 pieces of clothing to wear. And no wonder they cast lots for them. So anyway, that's just a little aside, because I think when we're studying, we don't think like that. We really don't. And incidentally, something else came to mind. I just finished reading Cokie Roberts' book on founding mothers. In the Revolutionary War, Martha Washington was in New York helping to feed and clothe the troops of the Revolutionary War. She took some of her own clothes and unraveled the threads and wove it into things for the men who had no clothes. We don't, that's not in the history books, but it's a fact. All right, so here we are. I thought that was a great thing to show these children to do things with their hands. See, I'm big on this. I think people today need to learn how to do things with their hands. Get your hands in some dough, hammer a nail, knit, sew, make something, paint, arrange flowers, do something. I think sometimes people are losing their minds because they don't know how to do stuff with their hands. That doesn't cost you anything. All right, now let's move on to the lesson, chapter 37 of Genesis. All right, here we go. And I really wanted to read the whole chapter. It's an interesting story, but I thought, good gosh, they'll be here till supper time if I do that. All right, so I'll just have to read what's in our book. And it skips over, but I'll try to fill it in. Joseph, a character of the day, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers, all those brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, when those were the concubines. Now, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his children because he was the son of his old age. And he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him. And they could not speak peaceably about him. Okay, you got that point? When you don't like somebody, you don't give them credit for anything good. If somebody says something good, you can turn it around and make something bad out of it. Isn't that right? Look at political figures today if you don't believe it. So Joseph, now skipping down to verse 17. Joseph went after his brothers. Now he had looked for them in several places and couldn't find them, but he was true to his father's assignment. He found the brothers in Dothan. The brothers, saw him from a distance, and before he even got to them, they conspired to kill him. And they said one to another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, the cistern. And we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him. And we'll see what becomes of his dreams then. In other words, you want to put an end to his dreams, let's kill him and that'll take care of it. But when Reuben, one of the brothers, heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, don't take his life. In other words, he's our blood. And Reuben said, shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness and lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father. That was Reuben thinking to himself. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore. And they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. And then Judah said to his brothers, what profit if it is if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother and our own flesh. And the brothers agreed. Okay, now as you know, they sold him to the Ishmaelites and he went on down to Egypt. And there's a whole other lesson to this story that unfolds down there. And then, of course, they went back to Jacob and took the coat with the blood on it and showed it to Jacob. And of course, he was grief-stricken. And he rent his own clothes, thinking, I will go to my grave mourning this child. What a grief that was to him. That's the way the 37th chapter goes on down. Now, I lost my place here. Now, we notice that this encounter with these brothers shows that Joseph is viewed with great contempt and suspicion at every single encounter. Like I said, he couldn't do anything right, no matter what it was. Isn't it interesting? The pet child, the brothers are not angry with the father. You know, he's the one that did this. He's the one that made the robe. He's the one that did all this stuff. They're not angry with the father. They're angry with who? Joseph, the object of all of this favoritism. Now, is this not the case? Think in your own families. Is there a pet child or a pet person or teacher's pet or whoever the anger is usually placed toward that person rather than the one who gives the favoritism. Now, by the way, the lesson to this chapter, all this month, we got 2 more lessons in this onward saga. It's written by a name by Chris O'Rear. I do not know him, never heard of him, but apparently he lives somewhere in Tennessee, and he has several degrees in marriage and family therapy and pastoral counseling, and he certainly seems to know what he's talking about. I read with great interest his treatment on this story today, and if you haven't read these lessons, I do invite you to read them. Also, he quotes in his lesson notes about the Bowen theory of family systems. Now, a man named Murray Bowen has written quite a bit on family systems. I got real intrigued with this a few years back and did a lot of reading on it. Now, don't give me a quiz on it now because I kind of forgotten half what I knew, but it was very intriguing. You know, these patterns, these things we see in this story, they're not random, isolated incidences, they're patterns in families. And he explains a lot of this in his book, and you have how one person, lines up with another one against this one and all this story, and it just goes on and on, and it's true. One thing that Bowen talks about is intergenerational anxiety. Jacob was all caught up in deceit, and you just see this deceit and trickery just going on down into the next generation. The father created this jealousy in the way he treated him. But now we'll have to admit, Joseph plays the role pretty well too, doesn't he? When he realizes he's favored, how does he feel? Kind of important. And I imagine he sort of swaggered a bit in that fancy robe. No one in this story that we've read today emerges as an innocent person. Everybody's got a little bit of fault here, which is probably the way it is in a lot of situations, isn't it? It's not always black and white. Now, his brothers called him the dreamer. Now, there again, if you've got several children or you're one of several, when there's always one child in the family that was the dreamer, really, something. There's always 1 or 2 children that do, they're going to do what they're supposed to do straight now, but there's another one that just kind of thinks outside the box and is creative and all that sort of. And that's interesting. That's not a negative. That's a good thing. We all need our characteristics. I've got some dreamers in my family. Dreams in the ancient world were frequently interpreted as signs from God, or as maybe prophecy, or meaning something that God was telling you to do. Not like today, dreams sometimes we get into psychological analysis and that sort of thing of the person doing the dreaming. But in biblical times, they had great meanings for what God was revealing. Joseph was a dreamer, and he also called himself an interpreter of dreams. And if you remember, this skill is very useful for him when he is in Pharaoh's palace. That's the story all out there. It's interesting how God was able to use him in this way. Now, let me ask you this. Have you noticed that the name of God does not appear in today's story? There's nowhere that God is saying to Joseph, I want you to go and do such and such. It doesn't. The name of God doesn't appear. But that does not mean that God is not getting his purpose worked out. He was. Through the life of Joseph, and many of these things that happened to him in his younger years were an influence to what he did later on. In many Bible stories, like God speaks to Moses and tells him what he wants him to do. And Moses dialogues with God, not me. Find somebody else's job. I don't want to do it. But it's different with Joseph. There's not a conversation, but God is at work. I think this is true in many cases in life. Sometimes we don't see it at the time, but maybe God is getting his purpose worked out. God is getting his purpose worked out many times in dysfunctional families, and when people are doing things that are not so good, somehow or another it gets turned and can be used in a favorable way. All right, now back to the original question of our, I forgot what, the original question underneath the title. When has jealousy gotten the better of me? I feel like at our age, we've gone through probably some jealousy and pettiness and rivalry, maybe in our own families or with our associates or in work relations. We've seen it. But I imagine that many of us have reached a point in life where our strivings have ceased. You think? We're not buying the next house or the next car. We're not hoping for the next promotion. And we've raised our children. So we've moved on to another stage of life. But I think that we have reached the age in life where we are aware of our losses. We can count them almost every day. Some of us have physical bodies who have lost some of their functionality. Yeah. We're not quite as mobile as we used to be. These knees that used to run up and down steps don't go that fast. All right. I think in retirement, we might have less money or less discretionary income than we maybe had at one time. I think many of us have lost a sense of prominence and a loss of identity maybe that we had with our jobs. We're no longer running a business. And in my father's case, you're not giving orders anymore, you know? We're not CEOs or executives. We're not teachers or ministers or lawyers. Things have changed, and we have to admit that we see this as a loss. I think many of us have lost our loved ones. My husband and I here of late have sat on the porch and talked over our coffee about the people that we have lost. And I think particularly for here, you know, I'm an only child, what do I know? He has lost his siblings. College. Excuse me. I'm coming to the end. He's lost his siblings, college friends, seminary friends, 2 in the past month. It's a grief. It's a loss. Now, but there, and I forgot the book. I have to bring it. No. I don't need a cough drop. I need the book. I was going to read. Joan Chittistone. Know her name? The Gift of Years. I love that book. I've read it 2 or 3 times. She talks about different things in life, limitations, anxiety, grief. At the end of each little chapter, she gives a burden and a blessing. And the one on limitations, she said, you know, we can moan what we don't have. And maybe we can look at somebody else that has good needs when ours don't work. And maybe there is a little bit of a jealousy there. I don't know. But we're still mourning what we lost. But she is saying, think of the life that we have lived and fulfilled and what we have seen and the gift of love and beauty and truth that we can give to the rest of the world that needs it in our time. And that was a takeaway message for that I wanted to quote for you and show the book. But
What was the book?
Joan Chittistone. Let's see if I can spell it. C-H-I, Joan. I think I'm spelling that right. No, but no. Now, I think I'm spelling her name right. She is quite, she's contemporary, she's still living. And she wrote that book when she was a bit younger than I am. She is considered quite a good person on matters of spirituality in today's world. And she wrote that book on the gift of years, and I have read it several times and underlined it. You will enjoy it. And I'm sorry that I walked off and got all this and didn't get the book, but that is the lesson of Joseph.